This young girl and her family cared for a litter of wolf cubs, but they never expected what would happen some months later. Aisha was born to loving parents who had a farm and a large plot of land. They had a goat and many chickens that stayed close to the barns. And further out into the fields, they kept dozens of sheep. Only one thing was missing for the couple. But after a few years of trying, they had finally had their beautiful baby, Aisha. The first few years of Aisha's life saw some complications, as mom and dad adjusted to their new way of life. Working on a farm meant early mornings and long hours. This posed a challenge for the couple because Aisha required a lot of attention. As a toddler, she was very loving and funny, but she struggled to learn to speak and would get fussy if things were not done consistently. For example, she'd always brushed her teeth after eating breakfast. One morning, they were a little late to get out to the barn in the fields, so Dad packed a breakfast for her to eat outside, and then he tried to get her to brush her teeth before they left the house. But that resulted in a huge meltdown. When Aisha was around 3 years old, Mom took her to the doctor for a checkup. She wanted to be sure that Aisha would learn to speak so she could attend school the following year. If she was diagnosed as nonverbal, then at least Mom and Dad could start investigating alternative methods of communication, like sign language. The doctor assured her that Aisha would eventually learn to speak. She just needed to go at her own pace. Still, they ran some tests, and after a few months of back and forth, they officially diagnosed Aisha as autistic. With the diagnosis came a lot of big emotions for the whole family. In some aspects, the parents were afraid their daughter would struggle in life and relationships. But on the other hand, they were relieved to better understand their child's needs. Aisha was perfect in her parents' eyes, and they loved her more than anything else in the world. Whatever label the world would attach to her, with the assistance and resources provided by the doctors, Mom and Dad reworked their lives to accommodate Aisha better. The biggest shift they had to make was sticking to a consistent schedule. Aisha did better when her days were laid out as she expected, and with routine came stability for her. Given the tremendous amount of time and work involved with running a farm, Mom and Dad had to get creative with their routine. Dad had to come home at lunchtime each day so that he could collect Aisha and head far out into the fields. The little girl enjoyed her afternoons outdoors, and the sheep seemed to gravitate toward her. Dad became amazed when he saw how Aisha would interact with animals. It was as though there was an immediate kinship between his daughter and any animal she encountered. Something in her nature communicated care and openness to the animals. The connection she formed superseded language and the need for communication. What a marvel this girl was. Mom and Dad noticed how much Aisha's quality of life improved after she started spending more time with the animals. Clearly, she had a gift, and they chose to foster that. Soon, Aisha's circle of animal friends grew to include the sheepdog, the goat, and all the chickens. She was keen to spend time with the animals and found it soothing. As she got a bit older, Mom and Dad began delegating some of the easier farming tasks to her. She excelled at feeding the animals and enjoyed consistently doing those chores simultaneously each day. Aisha was verbal at this point and doing well in school. Mom and Dad could not have been more proud. That summer, they chose to show Aisha how to fish. There was a nice stream on their property that they frequented. It had a vast current, so the parents rarely swam in it, and Aisha had never tried to swim there because of her small stature. They could stand ashore and use nets to fish though, so fishing became a new family hobby. A few times a week, Aisha would visit the stream to fish with one of her parents. Getting there was a bit tricky, and they had to navigate through fields and then a forest to reach the stream. Traveling back and forth across the whole property that summer, Aisha became aware of the vast array of wildlife that actually lived there. Aside from the farm animals, there were many other plants and animals on the land. One magical morning, Aisha and her dad were making their way through the forest, heading back home after some fishing at the stream. They walked in comfortable silence, as was their norm, when the wind brought in the sound of a small cry. Both of them stopped short. Did they really just hear that? Moments later, they heard the sound again. Then the cries began to overlap. Aisha and her dad looked at each other and decided, without speaking, that they would go towards the sound to investigate. Dad saw it first. He calmly reached out his arm sideways to communicate that Aisha should stop walking. She planted her feet and raced around the woods, looking for what had caught her father's attention. She looked down and could not believe her eyes. Nestled between the tree roots were 4 puppies, cooing and crying. They were tiny and did not yet seem to be able to fully open their eyes. Aisha asked her dad if those were wild dogs, and he chuckled to himself. "In a sense," he replied. He quietly explained to Aisha that pups were not, in fact, dogs, but rather their ancestors, wolves. However, he told her that he had never seen anything like this. Where was the pup's mother? They could only be a few days old. By the rules of nature, she should have been close by. Aisha stayed put to keep an eye on the wolf pups while Dad went in search of the mother. He did not have to look far. He realized as he came across a female wolf, she had passed away, and there was blood on her hind legs. The labor had likely been too much for her. Dad put some flowers on her head and said thank you to her. He returned to his daughter, and he gasped when he saw her. Aisha had sat down next to the wolves and leaned her back against the trunk of the tree. All 4 pups were sprawled neatly on her legs. They had stopped their crying. 3 of them appeared to be sleeping, and Aisha was delicately petting the other. These wolves had lost their mother, but fate had brought a new one to them. So Dad decided they wouldn't be separated. He helped his daughter carry the pups all the way home. Aisha set up one of the barns just for the wolf pups, and her parents helped her feed them some fresh goat's milk. Just like that, the small family grew to include 4 wolves. They loved Aisha so completely that they would follow her anywhere she went. It was lucky for everyone that these wolves were around one rainy day at the stream just a few months later. What they did was truly unbelievable. Aisha was fishing with her dad. He had 1 foot in the water to reach the net far across the stream. From the shore, Aisha tried to help him set the net up. The rain made the rocks she was standing on very slippery, and before either of them knew it, she had fallen into the water. Dad watched her go by in a flash, the current carrying her quickly downstream. He crawled back to the shore and began to run after his daughter. He slipped and fell and scraped himself quite badly on the edge of a rock. Panic flooded over him until he looked up and saw all 4 of their wolves sprinting ahead of Aisha. Wasting no time, they got into the water and formed a dam a short distance before her. They carried her right into their embrace, and they herded her back to shore. Thankfully, Dad was there to pull her onto land as they all lay panting on the ground. Dad could only think one thing. He had been incorrect before. Fate had not brought Aisha to save those wolf pups. Instead, fate had brought the pups to save her.